Welcome to this week's program. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. This program is brought to you weekly from the Valley Access Studios in Stillwater. Now, to help me with this week's news is Mr. Joe Waters, a regular reporter and columnist on this program. Thank you, Mr. Waters, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, for inviting me.
Yes. Now, we are going to continue with a report that we started on Off the Record News a week ago, which has to do with the decommissioning of the powers from the Housing and Economic Development Commission of Maplewood. And this is rather a bold move on the part of the council in that they didn't consult with the commission before they took the action. They just slowly and gradually brought the council, the commission, to a position where now they, in essence, have no authority to do anything at all. And they're just maybe a club of residents who get together and talk about what the council has already done in the regard to the economic and development of Maplewood.
Oh, kind of like an after-action report.
Yeah, that's right, an after-action report. Now, before we get started with continuing on this report, I want to let our viewers know that recently it was also brought to our attention that the Maplewood City Council is in the process of trying to bring about the death of the Maplewood Historic Preservation Commission. Imagine that. Now,
wow.
That was also a commission that occasionally, when they were having their meetings, would be expressing opinions different than those of the council members. And they often had recommendations that were different than what the council wanted to hear. The same way as the Headsey Commission often had recommendations that were different than what the council wanted to hear, especially when it came to eliminating public presentation at the meetings, as it applied to the rental ordinance, as it applied to some aspects of the rush line. It's amazing. So those commissions that have been disagreeing with the council seem to be on the march to being disbanded.
I was just about to say, it sounds like if you want a death wish, be on a commission where you disagree with the city council, and by God, you'll be killed off one way or another.
Yes. Well, of course, now what they did with the Headsey Commission, as we covered in our last report, is that they did a modification ordinance where they took the powers that the Headsey Commission had when it came to redevelopment with regard to housing. They took those powers away from them, and then they moved all those powers over to the council when it acts as the Economic Development Commission. So now the council has all the power, whereas before it was shared power. Now the council has everything.
I just want to make sure our audience understands it. You have the Economic Development Commission, Headsey, and then you have the Economic Development Authority. The authority is the council,
right,
because they have the power to tax and make the ultimate decision, where the commission is more advisory.
Yes, that's exactly right, and that the Headsey had within their organization and structure, they had certain powers that were granted to them by state statute that did have to do also with the redevelopment with regard to housing, but they were not a taxing authority.
No, okay.
Yes,
No,
that's correct. Okay. And what the council has done though with the Historic Preservation Commission is that they haven't disbanded them, because that would make all their buddies on the Maplewood Historical Society unhappy with them. So they can't disband the Maplewood Historical Preservation Commission, which is a commission sanctioned by city ordinance. So instead, what they have done is that they have enacted policies that pulls all city staff support away from the commission. So now the commission, in order to keep their minutes, they have to do their own minutes. They have to type them up. Now, I don't know who loads them onto the city website, but...
Well, you're assuming that they're loaded onto the website, that they have not been edited. First.
That's right. And they've also been taken off of the cable casting government channel that Maplewood runs. They no longer are videotaping them or audio recording them. They no longer have a staff liaison attending their meetings like all the other commissions in Maplewood. And they won't even allow them to turn on the microphones when they're meeting in the council chambers for their meeting.
So when are they going to kick them out of the chambers then? If you're going to do all that, you might as well just complete the project and just say you can't even meet here.
Right. And that was a concern of the commission, that they would not be allowed to meet at City Hall, even though they are a city-sanctioned committee that was appointed by the council. Now, this past week, they had a meeting on December 12th. And a few days prior to that, Put Your Hands Together Productions offered to the city, since the city claimed that the reason that they could not have somebody there to videotape them was because they ran out of money, that Put Your Hands Together Productions volunteered to the city to volunteer our man-hours to run the equipment so that the meeting could be cable cast and also be put on the website of the city, and so that business could go on as usual. First, the city said, oh, maybe there's liability issues for volunteers. Of course, that doesn't explain the fact that they have volunteers in their police reserves, and they, of course, are using city cars, which are probably have a higher risk of danger than running the camera equipment does. And then also, after they discovered that the liability issue wasn't going to hold water, since probably their insurance covers volunteers, then they said, well, because they bought all this expensive equipment, they don't have the budget for training to train a volunteer to use their expensive equipment. And the response of one individual is that it's a shame that they spent all that money on this high-tech equipment, but now they have no budget in order to use it.
Well, can I make this proposal? Why don't you go in as an independent contractor with your own equipment? That way, there's no liability issue because you have your own liability insurance. There's no training issue because you already know how to operate your own equipment. Essentially, you bring your own tape, or of course, these days it's put on a server, and when you're done, you download it and you send it to the city.
Well, you know, that's an excellent idea, Mr. Waters. That's why you are with Put Your Hands Together Productions, because we actually did send out one of our crew over to the Maplewood Historic Preservation Commission, and we taped that meeting. And the commissioners were very grateful that somebody was there to tape their meeting, and that meeting will be presented to the city so that way that they can put it on their government channel, since it is about government. It is one of their sanctioned meetings, and it is held in their council chambers. So I think it meets all the criteria for any production to be put on their government channel.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we got a very good staff out there, you know, and I've seen their work, and it's top notch, you know, just as good, if not better than the city. So you know, they can't argue about that, but I'm sure they'll find some way to try to weasel their way out of it.
Right, exactly. So with that update, this is now bringing us to part 2 of talking about the decommissioning of the Headsey Commission in Maplewood, the decommissioning by this Maplewood City Council of a very important commission in Maplewood. Because Maplewood, as we've discussed on these programs, is a first-ring suburb. And as a first-ring suburb, we should be concerned about how are we going to continue to develop and redevelop our community so that we can be economically viable.
Well, particularly redevelopment. We're pretty much built out. Now it's a matter of taking those aging structures, either repurposing them, which you see done a lot particularly in Minneapolis, or you're going to have to, some of them are going to have to be raised, and then new structures put in place. But you need to be looking at as I look at it, the financial base of the city long term.
Right, exactly. And so the Maplewood City Council, they took their action, and this was, they actually took the action back in July of 2019. But then in November, they decided, oh, gee, that some of the commission members of the HEDC are feeling a little uneasy and feeling a little unhappy with the fact that they had powers taken away from them and don't understand why. So the Maplewood City Council decided, let's have a joint meeting with the members of the HEDC and have them talk to us about their ideas about redevelopment. After the fact, after they've been decommissioned.
Hey, let's build a building that fails, and let's ask, why did it fail? Or maybe we shouldn't have put it there in the first place.
Absolutely. And here's the irony of all of this, is that this was a 3-hour meeting. It was held at City Hall in the council chambers, where all that expensive equipment is for cable casting and webcasting these meetings of the Maplewood City Council. And do you think that the Maplewood City Council cable cast or webcast that meeting, that 3-hour very important meeting, joint meeting of the council and the members of the HEDC Commission?
No.
No. Now, the reason that City Manager Melinda Coleman gave for being unable to cable cast or video camera and webcast this meeting was because the microphones weren't working.
Wait a minute. Didn't we just spend some money on expensive equipment, and the microphones are not working? Is there a warranty on these things? Can I go to Best Buy and just pick up a couple of mics, use them and return them when I get done?
Well, certainly Put Your Hands Together Productions came to the rescue once again. And here we are at their 3-hour meeting, and we filmed the entire 3-hour meeting. And we do not have standalone mics. We have cameras that have microphones built into them that actually work.
Interesting.
And I think that we bought our camera that was used that evening. I think we bought it at a major retailer. I'm not going to name them, but they are a major retailer still in business that sells audio-video equipment to consumers. And I believe that we spent under $200 for our camera. And our microphones work.
Huh, interesting. It tells you there are options out there.
So let's take a look at our first clip. This is one that we played in our last news program, which is the city attorney describing the actions that the council is taking and what the ramifications are. Let's take a look.
Would you respond to the comments that were made during the public opinion part of our meeting tonight?
Mayor and Council, that's somewhat difficult. The City Council has always been the Economic Development Authority, and to the extent that you've acted in that context, really there's nothing that's going to change. What's going to happen as a result of this modification, if it's adopted, is that the EDA will also have HRA powers. Basically, the HRA allows development and redevelopment, particularly for low and moderate income housing. Those will be married to the broader economic development powers of an EDA. So the council will continue in its role, but have a broader set of powers available to it.
As I indicated, it's going to have a broader set of powers available to it. And he was very clear that the HEDC Commission had granted to it originally, the way that they had been constituted, the redevelopment rights, or authority rather, when it comes to housing. And we know that this is a very critical issue going on in Maplewood right now because the Maplewood City Council and the city manager, Melinda Coleman, have big plans for building and redevelopment areas, housing with high density housing and predominantly voucher housing. And I think that the reason that the council is making this move, this is my opinion, in looking at this, is because the council was not confident that the members of the HEDC Commission would be going along with the council and city manager Melinda Coleman's plans of putting up a lot of high-density housing as redevelopment, and especially focusing on voucher housing.
Interesting. From my understanding, aren't these commissions supposed to reflect the public at large, particularly the HEDC Commission, which is supposed to reflect both the residents, the citizens of Maplewood, and the business owners and representatives of Maplewood?
That's absolutely correct, because the history of this commission is essentially, it's the formation of two commissions that were merged together, because a previous council decided that they didn't want to have two commissions. They put together, merged them into two. It was the business commission, I forget the full name of it, and then there was the Housing and Redevelopment Commission, and they merged them into what now is called the HEDC. And it was to represent, as you indicated, both business interests and resident interests in Maplewood when it comes to redevelopment.
Right, because as I remember when that commission was formed, the idea was not all business owners live in the city, but they have their businesses located there. So it was ideal to get someone from those businesses, such as the mall, such as St. John's, 3M, as well as citizens throughout the city of Maplewood that reside within the corporate limits, as they say.
Right. And so with this move now, the council has essentially taken that voice away and now put all the power into their basket.
Essentially, they're imposing their will on the citizens.
That's correct. And that's why it's important for people to realize that next fall in 2020, that 4 of the 5 city council seats are up for election.
Correct.
So it's a very important election. It's going to be pivotal for many reasons. Certainly, it could change the makeup of the council. And I think that this particular council and this particular city manager, that they don't want to have those changes made at the election, because they're doing everything they can to hold their power that they've got right now.
Just keep it up, because you're gonna, if you sit there and say you want citizen involvement, citizens apply, and then they find out they're being pushed aside, there's gonna be pushback.
That's right. Well, next we're going to get started with our film footage of that 3-hour joint meeting. And as I indicated, there's a lot of film footage, and we're only going to be touching the iceberg on that meeting here on this program today. But we're going to continue bringing excerpts out of that meeting for you in the coming weeks for your information. So let's get started with the outline of what the agenda is going to be for the meeting.
It'll end in terms of the agenda for the day. Welcome introductions, we've already done that, so we all know who's here. We're going to go a little bit through, we sent out a survey to folks earlier to kind of identify some areas that they would like to discuss, and so we'll kind of review some of those survey results and some focus areas. And then staff are going to prepare a little bit of a very short sort of debrief about what each of those topic areas sort of mean, so provide a little bit more context. Then we're going to do some small group exercises, which we'll explain when we get to them, but it's an opportunity to really engage in a really meaningful kind of a deep dive at each table. And then a deep dive individually doesn't do us any good until we get the broad perspective of the room, so each group will sort of report out, and hopefully we can align around some consensus, where we would actually walk out with some prioritization of the things that we want to work on. And then ownership is really, which group should take lead responsibility for driving initiatives forward. Is it something that EDA should drive? Is it something HEDC should drive? Is it truly staff driven? And so we'll get to some consensus around that. And so this whole day should give us some really robust discussion. So this is, for folks who are wondering, this is kind of the flow of the day.
you notice they're going to have robust discussion, and they're going to come to a consensus as to what their role is going to be. My prediction is, and of course as we go through our film footage over the next coming weeks, we'll see if it unfolds in this manner. We want to keep our viewers in suspense rather. But it's a process in which to get the members of the HEDC Commission to the point where they agree to have now this reduced role in the direction of redevelopment in Maplewood.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate you on those mics. Those are pretty good mics. I must say, those are darn good mics. And you spent less than $200 for it? Congratulations. Second of all, I think we should introduce who that gentleman is, because he replaced Mike Funk, who used to be the Assistant City Manager / Human Resources Director. Somebody told me his name. Hopefully we'll get that name. But he's the new Assistant City Manager / Human Resource Director. And finally, as I'm sitting there listening to you and listening to the comments made by this gentleman, it's kind of like, we want you on our page, and this is the program we're going to present to you to get you to our page.
Yes, exactly. And his last name is Sable, Mr. Sable.
Mr. Sable. Isn't it Mike Sable, I believe?
Yes, that's correct.
You know, so Mr. Sable is basically putting out his PR campaign as to why you should go our direction, not the direction you want to go.
Yes.
Forget what you bring to the table. Follow our path.
And it's, I think, telling that they're using the new guy, because he's been the assistant city manager there in Maplewood now for, I don't know, 2 months maybe, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. So they're using the new guy to be the facilitator, the guy who doesn't have any knowledge of any of the history of what went on, of how to answer the questions. He can actually legitimately say, when somebody asks him a question, he can say, I don't know. Whereas if they would have had Melinda Coleman, the city manager, facilitating this meeting, she wouldn't be able to get off so easy to say, I don't know. She just got a big fat pay raise.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, when you start asking really challenging questions, you know, she kind of dodges it. And, you know, he can at least dodge it for right now. But down the line, he will be, I'm sure he's been brought into the fold. And like you said, you get a fresh face, a fresh perspective, and people are like, oh, this guy's not so bad after all.
Right, exactly. Well, let's take a look at our next clip.
And I'm out of the loop, but some clarity on what sort of drove this meeting coming about, and yeah, some I guess context for, you know, I'm happy to be here, but I've been out of the loop.
Well, I would look to the head's chair first. Mark, you can try and answer, and then Bill, you're the chair of the EDA. I'll ask you to kind of go second, and then we'll get the group to weigh in if there's anything that we're missing. Is that helpful?
One of the members of the HEDC Commission, right off the bat, comes out and says, you know, I'm a little in the dark here. How did we get to this point? How did this meeting get called? Because you see, this commission has been in existence for years. And this council, which, you know, 3 of the 5 on there, voted to extend their terms from 4 years to 5 years. And so you see, there's council members who are currently in place that have been in place for 5 years. They're going on their 5th year. And they have had the opportunity all along that they could have had this joint meeting with the HEDC. Why wait till now? Good question. So instead then, they're going to pawn it off then on to Mark Jenkins, who's the head of the HEDC, who of course always gives the city's storyline. You can always count on him to give the city's storyline. So they're now going to hand it off to their leader of their commission to explain it to them how they got to this point.
Oh, this will be interesting to hear.
Let's continue.
I'm going to say, 2 months ago maybe, there was some outreach from Melinda and the mayor and Brian and a couple others about the EDA or the council, whichever way you want to look at it, had some interest in actually starting to really get engaged with housing as well as economic development in the city of Maplewood. And we sat down, had a discussion, some brainstorming on how do we do that. Talked about the tour we did about 2 weeks ago now. And I'm going to say that was probably the start of them getting us together and talking about what did we see in the tour, what are issues we've talked about in the commission for some of us for years, and or even more recently. And I'd say that's my understanding. I don't know if Bill or Melinda, do you want to add to that?
I'm watching this, and Miss Coleman's going like this. Yep, you're on the right track. You're on the right track. And he's looking over like, am I saying the right things? Yep. Keep going. You're fine. You're doing okay.
And you heard his acknowledgement that his quote, the things we've been talking about in the commission for years,
Well,
which does acknowledge that they've been ignored by the commission and the recommendations that are coming out of this commission. They've been ignored by the council for years.
Yeah, I was about to say, because the commission for about the last, if I recall, the last couple of years has only met 4 times a year. Because they used to meet monthly, and then they weren't getting the attendance because they didn't have the bodies to get a quorum. So then they went, I want to say it was 2016, 2017. They went from 12 meetings a year to 4 meetings a year.
And I think that many of the members just quit going because they wanted to work on more, and all that was being given to them was the rehash of what the council did at the last council meeting,
Yeah.
rather than giving them work and policies to work on.
And so they can make recommendations to the council. Yeah, I remember that because I do remember one former commission member saying that they wanted to work on things like tax increment financing, because I think one of the issues that he wanted specifically to work on before it went to the council was the 3M Research Center. Is this a good use of taxpayer money? Well, yeah, taxpayer dollars. Is this a good use of the tax code for a project like this? Mm-hmm. And he wanted to work on that, and there were some other issues that he wanted to work on that he felt were pertinent. But by the time it came, like you said, by the time it came to this commission, the decision had already been made. So it's almost like you're giving your points, your thoughts afterwards. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Mark Jenkins, in that clip, indicated that the mayor, the city manager, council member Brian Smith, that they were reaching out to Mark Jenkins, and that Mark Jenkins had a meeting with them to roadmap this whole thing out. So who is he representing?
Well,
is he representing, and when he's speaking here, is he representing the interests of the city and the people he was meeting with? And so he is the one put at the forefront to smooth it over with the rest of the commissioners so that come election time, they don't vote differently and say, well, those people, they are off the mark, we're going to vote them out? Question the...
Yeah, good question.
Mm-hmm. Let's continue.
I was part of the HRA, and then we kind of joined together with Etsy, and my previous, I think it was 2 meetings ago, it was brought forth that the HRA component of Etsy was going to move over to the EDA, and I kind of had some concerns about it because the EDA is all council members, and I really kind of wanted to know if there was going to be any commission input, because commission is, lots of volunteers, but we're more in the community.
That's Joy. She's a member of the Etsy Commission, and she's bringing up exactly the same concerns that were brought up at the public hearing in July by a Maplewood resident, in that on the Etsy you've got people from the community who are residents and business owners that are the voice of the community and talking about housing and recommendations for that. And Joy is expressing her concern that when that power was taken away from the HETC and given to the council under the umbrella of the EDA, the Economic Development Authority, that what was the role of the commission? Did they have a purpose anymore? Why should she go to meetings now?
Yeah, she's a longtime member as well, because like she said, I think she was part of the Housing and Economic Development Commission, so she has that institutional knowledge as well. But yeah, that is the question. Why should I go to the meetings? Why wasn't I consulted about this in the first place, that this was going to happen, so I could give my input as to what I think you should do or shouldn't do.
Right, and keep in mind the timeline is that in July is when the council took the action finally to pull those HRA authority powers away from the commission and bestow it upon the EDA. And here, this meeting is November.
Yeah.
So this has been brewing a while. So, what finally did bring them to this point? Enough people complaining?
That's how I look at it. Maybe enough people finally went to the commission chair, Mark Jenkins, the commission chair, Mark Jenkins, saying, "Hey, we want to discuss this, but we want to discuss it openly."
Right. Well, let's continue.
Some of my concern was now the power or decisions lie with council.
And there she is asking again, what about our decisions, and what's the value of that? Mm-hmm. What's the value of going to meetings? Let's continue.
He was trying to integrate the community, the commission, and the city council, so we can, go through all the background and stuff when we do make decisions. This with a more robust kind of input. Kind of interesting. I was leaving my office, decided we're having an early council meeting today. We're going to talk about economic development and city. So what does that mean? Well, okay, we've got people that live here, they want to live here safely. We've got businesses here, we want employees that support the business, we want education to be this way, we want healthcare. Oh, she said all of that, and I said, yeah, we're going to do all that tonight.
Now that, of course, is William Bill Knutson. He's an appointed member to the Maplewood City Council. And in his discussion points there, he's just being sort of glib about, somebody talking to him about, what do they do as an EDA, and what do they do as a council? Well, the real issue is what are you going to do to utilize your HETC commission to its fullest capacity?
To me, he's kind of dodging the question.
Yes, definitely. Let's continue.
That's really it. I mean, you want to live here. If you live here, can you afford to live here? Is there a place for me? How do you integrate developers into the fact that we need low-income housing? We need that for our community. Those are workers that we need. We need to encourage, workers to work at 3M. We want people to live here. We want people to work here. All those things take a lot of effort. And when we're talking about a first-ring suburb, based on our tour and stuff, we need to redevelop. So what does it take to redevelop? And I think that's, in my view anyway. And we have, how about the financial issues?
As I'm listening to him, when he talks about that, that's the stuff the commission should be talking about well ahead of time. Because by the time he gets to the authority, you're making a decision to go a particular direction. Those kind of conversations, like you said, you want it to be a safe place to live. You want affordable housing. You want people to do the business. That's what the commission's all about. And you should be working with other commissions, not necessarily Maplewood commissions, but if people want to move to Maplewood, move their business here to Maplewood, there should be working with commissions from the school district and the county, so that it is affordable.
Right, and these are the type of discussions that I believe that there was a concerted effort to keep the HETC from having, because what they would essentially do at their meetings is that the staff would only be looking at and having them talk about items and only place items on the agenda that were what the council had done or what they are going to do at the next meeting. Not say, okay, let's talk about these long-range plans, or even as simple as putting together a policy for how are we going to give out short-term loans as part of economic development.
Yeah, because if we think back about 10 years ago with the dance studio that bought that piece of property on Cope Avenue, there was a loan that was given to them, and there was really no public follow-up as to, did they pay the loan back? Did they create the number of jobs, full-time and part-time jobs that they promised? On and on and on. But at the time that they gave the loan, they said, yeah, we're going to develop a policy to address such things. And that's where that commission would come in.
Right, and this is the commission that would have had the time to do that. They would have had the inclination they wanted to do something like that, and yet they were not charged with that. So when Mr. Knutson is talking about, that these are the things we want to do, well, sure, fine and dandy, but where have you been? Have you not been watching what was going on in your city before you got appointed? Oh, by your buddy Marley Abrams? I mean, there you go. See, so it's like he's talking and remember, he has in the past been a developer and has been the administrator of St. John's Hospital. So it's not that he doesn't have the knowledge base and the expertise that should be necessary in order to actually ask the relevant questions and actually put together a project plan to get these things accomplished. But he's not using any of his skills in actually putting together that game plan. He's only talking about them superficially as if he's reading from a book.
Probably. They probably gave him a script and said, make sure you just talk about these points and we'll help you get reelected.
Let's continue.
I would just say that, one of the major reasons, at least from my perspective, and I think staff, is that we really wanted to get the two groups together to help us prioritize, because we can't do everything that we need to be doing. And we don't feel like we're the ones who should prioritize that. That should come from council and our boards. And so I think prioritization and ownership, which is what we're trying to get to tonight, that's really what's important for us, is that we know what heads should be working on, what your priorities are, and also what the council should be doing. Because otherwise, we're just trying to do everything and we can't do it.
Melinda Coleman, the city manager of Maplewood, indicates that the reason that this is also important for her is because they can't all do it alone. They can't do it alone.
No.
They got to do it together. They got to have them help them prioritize. Except that they just took away authority and power from the HETC. So this is really just a little club meeting to talk about priorities,
This is
coffee
the way to get things off your chest. We'll help you. You got to help us prioritize what we tell you to prioritize. Stuff like that. This is just, let's all vent. Let's spend 3 hours venting, and we'll prioritize. But we're going to tell you what to prioritize, not what you want, what we want, and we'll all be happy at the end of the day.
Yes. I think you've got the plan there, Mr. Waters. Let's continue.
EDA chair before Bill, and Mary and I started talking about this early this year around sort of making the EDA a real force, right? It's been pretty dormant for a long time. And so I think as we were talking about, we thought really strongly that if we're going to do that, we need to have a set and stated strategy around that. So I think it's prioritization for sure, but I think it's also prioritization within a vision of what we want the EDA to do, where the resources go. There's lots of emerging things for us to pay attention to. But how do we kind of set that stage to say what we want to do, how are we going to measure that, what does success look like as we try to do that, and give us that sort of roadmap so that if we do look at evaluating things, we're all saying the same thing.
Councilmember Brian Smith says we need to, set the stage. We're going to prioritize. And we're coming together and doing this because, the HETC Commission has been relatively dormant for all this time. And I'm thinking, and who made it dormant? It was made dormant by the council when the council said they don't need to meet monthly anymore. We're just going to have them meet quarterly because, well, there's not enough work for them to do. We don't trust them to do any of the policy making. We don't trust them to come up with policies for putting out small business loans to community businesses as part of the economic development plan. We don't trust them to come up with a recommendation that's going to meet the big picture of what we need to do to support the BRT going through Gladstone. We don't trust them that they're going to agree to increase the density in Gladstone from 26 units per acre to 50 units per acre. So we don't trust them that they are going to say it's okay to buy the Moose Lodge property for 25% over the market value. We don't trust them to do any of those things. So I wonder why the HETC has been dormant, because the council hasn't trusted them to give an opinion on anything. Now, I would like to know that if the HETC Commission had been presented with the possibility of purchasing the Moose Lodge, how they would have felt about offering 25% over the market value to outbid the other party who also wanted to buy the Moose Lodge property.
That was my point. That's what I was looking at too. It's like, yeah, you may offer 25% more. If I'm a property owner, I'm going to take the 25% more because I'm getting out of the property. But as someone that should be a fiduciary of the taxpayers' money, is like you said, is that a wise use of money? Why are we spending more to buy this property to keep it out of private hands? Wouldn't we want it in private hands to put it back, if it's not there already, to put it back on the tax rolls?
Right. And you see, because there was a private party that was having a competing purchase agreement, competing with Maplewood for the Moose Lodge property. And Maplewood specifically created the public policy, this council created the public policy that it's okay for city staff to go 25% over market value in order to outbid a private entity who wants the same property. Now, that, of course, we know that because we obtained the audio of that closed meeting where that public policy was created, and we've played that on these news programs. And you can also listen to that particular meeting in its entirety on our YouTube channel. And what we've done so that it makes it easier for you to understand who is saying what in the audio for that meeting, we have actually taken still shots of the headshots of each of the people who were speaking during that meeting and have placed them over the audio so that you can identify who the speaker is, including the name of who the speaker is, so you understand who is responsible for making these policies and for deciding these types of direction to go.
Yeah, it makes it easier to follow.
So let's continue with our joint meeting between the Maplewood City Council and the HETC Commission members. That was November 25th, 2019.
One other point too is that, I was the chair of the EDA for several years, and it was really pretty inactive. We weren't really doing much, and there wasn't a real clear focus on what we should be doing. And Ron Beatty had started talking about some other cities that have very effective dynamic EDAs and what those structures look like. And he is the one that then brought forward the idea of mirroring some of those other communities where they do have a very robust EDA.
That's the appointed mayor, Marley Abrams. She's an attorney, so she knows that it's always an easy out to blame the attorney. So she now is blaming the city attorney for being the one who made the suggestion to take those housing redevelopment authority rights that the commission had, take those away from them and give it to the council under the umbrella of the EDA. Because that's going to make the council's EDA now more dynamic.
Interesting. The question I have, listening to Mayor Abrams, she said Ron Beatty, the city attorney, brought us examples of other cities. In previous clips, have they talked about the other cities, the pros and cons of each of the whatever number of cities that they're following? They talked about the pros and cons of going that direction?
Well, that's a good question. Now, at the July 2019 meeting, when they finally took the action to take those powers away from the HEDC and give them entirely to the Economic Development Authority, the City Council, they did not talk about that at all because they assumed that everybody heard and was present for the other meetings the previous year when this was all discussed, back in November of 2018. Of course, keep in mind, back in November 2018, the appointed people who were voting on it in July of 2019 were never on the council. So they never heard those presentations.
So, in essence, the city attorney should have come back saying, let's refresh your memory.
That's
and taking
right.
time and saying, City X used to do it this way, now they're doing it this way. City Y, on and on and on, to give the new appointed council members a idea of what direction we're going to go, rather than like, here, you figure it out.
I think that would have been a best practice.
Yeah.
Let's continue.
Looking at our city and based on the tour that we went on, there are certainly some areas where we have some opportunities. And so Ron brought forward the idea to the council about a restructure, and I really see this meeting as figuring out how do we get some momentum and how do we all work together, because I see HEDC as being absolutely crucial, working with the EDA so that we can do all of the things that Bill identified we were going to do tonight, or at least talk about. But this way, I think we all start out with an understanding of what that looks like.
So in essence, forget the process. Forget the fact that we just pushed you people aside. Let's all get together and act like buddies. Let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya going forward. If I'm on that commission, and I know I've been underutilized all these years, what confidence do I have that you're going to now suddenly utilize me? I mean, particularly when you did this reorganization where you pushed me aside and basically said, this is the direction we're going to go, and then I got to figure out what direction to go. What confidence would I have as a member that you're going to listen to me when you haven't been listening to me in the past?
Yes. And she talks about that somehow that this is now going to give them the momentum to get beyond the fact that they haven't been doing diddly squat as a council in regard to creating policy or utilizing the HEDC for them to create policy for recommendation to the council, because certainly they were available to do that the whole entire time. All the council had to do was to direct the city manager, who is the only employee the city council has any authority over, direct the city manager to direct the staff to put on the agenda for the HEDC that they're going to talk about and develop a policy for X, Y, and Z, make those recommendations to the council, have a joint meeting, and then they could have done all of this years ago. But that council never did that. And Marley Abrams has been on the council for 5 years, and now she's coming to it like as if she is, this is just going to give us the momentum we need. Well, who has been responsible for the last 5 years?
Yeah.
She has been responsible for the inactivity of the last 5 years.
Correct. Well, the other thing I was thinking of too, because usually when they go into as the HEDC, usually the city manager is the executive director of the HEDC. So, or not the HEDC, but the Economic Development Authority. So really the Economic Development Authority, who's only an employee, which is the executive director / city manager, they could direct that person to give the presentation to the HEDC commission. And really, that executive director, not a staff person, that executive director should be explaining to the HEDC commission what is going on, what direction they want to take.
Absolutely. And that brings up another point, too, is that the city manager, Melinda Coleman, is just standing back like this is all just happening around her and that she is there to do their bidding. That's not really the way the Plan B city works. Plan B city works in that she is in charge of the day-to-day affairs. She is the CEO of the city of Maplewood. That's what her role is as a city manager of a Plan B city. And so she should be setting out what are the goals and directives that the council could be considering. That's part of what her job is supposed to be, is giving them guidance on how they can be a better council. But instead, she's sitting back and letting everybody else do all the explaining, when she's the one that gets the big paycheck and should be explaining. As you indicated, she's like the executive director of the EDA. That's part of her role in that. That's why she's been hired for that by the council.
It's called PTA, Protect Thou Assets.
Let's continue.
It's not new for other cities that have really gotten some traction. And they're the cities that we looked at. Robbinsdale is one of them. And I want to say was St. Louis Park one of them too, that Ron brought forward as these are models as what other cities are doing and can do. And I think that was inspiring to us that we need to move forward.
Well, I was going to interject too, because Robbinsdale I think is a Plan A city, but St. Louis Park is a charter city, a charter suburb of 45,000 people. So the power of the Charter Commission can really force the council to move in a particular direction. So if there's going to be changes, particularly if it's your changes to the Charter Commission, which really kind of has a little bit more power than the City Council because it's more court directed than it is with elected people, can really kind of force the city. Like, if you're going to make these changes, you need to explain what these changes entail and what direction they're going to go. All you had to do is look at Minneapolis when there was a couple of ordinances where one council member tried to change the reporting requirements for the police chief in Minneapolis, and the city council says, no, we're going this way, and then the Charter Commission says, no, you're going that way. And the Charter Commission ended up winning.
And that's very important to this whole discussion of understanding whether or not, if the action taken by the council to put all the powers into their basket, so to speak, is the right decision for Maplewood. Because as you indicated, Robbinsdale is Plan A city, St. Louis Park is a charter city, Maplewood is a Plan B city. And so the dynamics of how the governance in a community is based upon, in part, the way it's structured, the way its governance is structured. And there's not been any analysis of that. And certainly appointed Mayor Abrams should know as an attorney that there is a distinction between different types of city organizations and the impact it has on the dynamics of how they operate.
And if they want to look at some changes, all they do is go directly to the west. Look at Roseville, because they went through this about 5 years ago, where they had a separate, they had the EDA authority, which was the council, but they actually had a separate EDA. It wasn't a division of the city, and it had its own executive director, which it still has its own executive director, who is not the city manager, interestingly enough.
Right, and that would be an excellent city for Maplewood to look at as maybe one that could be similar to Maplewood, because Roseville is a Plan B city.
Correct.
And there are only 16 Plan B cities in the whole state of Minnesota. One happens to be Roseville, right next door to Maplewood. And that would have been a good
model to look at.
Yes, that's right. Well, we have a little bit of time left for another couple of clips, so let's take a look.
Joy's concern too. Move with the HRA was not a move as far as trying to limit the voices involved in the discussion. It was more of a structural move to simplify the decision-making process into a single authority. But I think this meeting and future meetings should show that the intention is to broaden that discussion to commissions.
Councilmember Brian Smith, he doesn't want them to feel like they're being limited. But this is a way for them to
Improve the process.
improve the process.
Wow.
So,
Make the process run smoother.
yes. And this and that's why it's so important for our viewers to see what I call cotton candy talk that's going on here. It's not substantive, it is meaningless, and it's all just to try to smooth the waters so that the commissioners who have come to this meeting don't feel as ruffled as they probably do. You know, trust us. We're your friends. We didn't mean to do you any harm. We didn't mean to take any powers away from you. We're not limiting your voice. You're so important to us, and yet we don't trust you to really make any kind of recommendations that have any power behind them. But we want to hear what you got to say.
Yeah. That's what we're here for.
That's right. Please tell us. Well, let's continue and hear where it goes.
So we're going to switch on to the next segment, and I talked about reviewing the survey results, and thank you for those folks who did the Survey Monkey. I know that it was a little bit maybe to just get this random email asking for perspective. So folks who provided that, I did that. This is kind of an opportunity for Jeff to sort of come up and talk about.
Oh my gosh,
A camera.
they've got a camera there. Now Melinda Coleman, she indicated that they couldn't cablecast or webcast this meeting, that they couldn't film it because the microphones weren't working. But you know, that particular camera that gentleman was using, by the way, he's employed by the city of Maplewood in the communications department. His salary is paid in part from the funds that come from the PEG fees that every single Maplewood Comcast subscriber has to pay every single month to the city of Maplewood to maintain the government channel, of which, of course, they can't figure out how to get this meeting on. But they've got their guy there who is an employee there with his big expensive camera. Now that camera, I will tell you, probably is in the range of over $1,500, maybe more. And that has on it a very large boom mic. You could see it there in the picture. You could see the microphone. I know that microphone's working. So why was Melinda Coleman being disingenuous? Good question. Now, the point you may ask is, why is the camera guy there? Well, the camera guy for the city is there to get little snippets of the meeting that they can then put into a little YouTube presentation to show the public of how the City Council and the Headsey Commission had a 3-hour meeting to work together, move forward, and set priorities for the future of Maplewood. Now, doesn't that just sound like out of some PR playbook?
Yeah. It's scripted. I'd be curious to see what kind of one-on-one interviews they have at the end of the YouTube clip.
Well, we've come to the end of our program, and I hope that you've enjoyed this analysis of this portion of the joint meeting. Now, of course, in our next coming up news programs in the coming weeks, we'll have more substantive content with regard to the conversations that were had, so you can hear what they really discussed. But it's good to know this background information of how we got here. As that first commissioner indicated, I've been kept in the dark. How did we get here? Well, thank you, Mr. Waters, for coming on the program.
Yeah, Mayor, thank you for inviting me.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.